Hi, this is Vitas Casilius, and I want to welcome you to this issue of the CMC Solves webinar series, where in this installment we're going to talk about next generation solutions in recovery management and how to succeed in the new paradigm. As always, I start with welcoming those of you on the East Coast, good afternoon. On the West Coast, good morning. In the UK, good evening. And in Australia, you people just need to sleep more because it's 4 a.m. The series is a monthly get-together amongst those of us in the industry that are interested in figuring out how to solve many different problems. This month, we're going to talk about the changing paradigm in recovery, what agencies are saying and how they're responding to it, how we position our bank for meeting these new challenges and finding the upside, and how do we get to that. As always, we would welcome any comments and suggestions either about how these webinars work or any new topics to us at the email address listed. And remember that at the end of this webinar, you'll have a chance to provide your feedback, and we very much welcome it and value it because that drives what topics we're going to work on next. So let's dive into it. We only have 30 minutes. As you know, in all the different markets in which we are talking to clients, we keep hearing about the fact that it's a whole new ballgame. Not only are there new regulators, with the FCA, with CFPB, but there's a new aggressiveness on the part of the regulators to interpret old regulations more aggressively and to write new regulations. In all markets, there are regulations that increasingly focus on the oversight of third parties. I just here listed several from U.S. regulators that were very handy, and it's very topical and relevant. The OCC just put one out in October about third-party monitoring that all of the vendors like CMC and others are scrambling to make sure that we deal with. And the latest proposed guideline from the CFPB talks quite a lot about it. You also know that there have been a number of high-profile, high-dollar enforcement actions that have made it the case that if you're not compliant, you're giving up a lot of money to the law, and that's obviously not the situation anybody listening to this webinar wants to find themselves in. So I'd ask you to ask yourself, can you reflect on your organization as it relates to the treatment of your recovery accounts and your agency placements, and where would you put yourself? And we actually have folks that we talk to that have gone as far as saying, they don't even place accounts with third-party agencies or don't sell debt anymore, all the way through to people that have reduced significantly the number and breadth of agencies, all the way through to people that would say, we're not all that changed, although it's rare for us to hear somebody say, we're proceeding business as usual. Just as a level set, there are clearly issues on both sides of the ledger. Both creditors and agencies have their view, but today's webinar is really about focusing on the creditor. What are the creditor's issue with respect to providing the kind of transparency and visibility to agency actions that allow for reportability and good auditability of my third parties and their activities? Because the scrutiny has gotten to the point where it's the sins of my agency are my sins. And that's key because it used to not be that way. The substantial enforcement actions I referenced are really serving notice to us that regulators are serious when they say they want us to make sure that our agencies act under the same level and extent of scrutiny that we ourselves deal with. The reputational risk of not getting it right is huge. But there's also the how do I deal with this in terms of not having to just throw people at it in vendor management. And I hear that from many of the directors of compliance. They're just having to throw bodies at the problem. As you all know, the perspective of the bank has changed from the times when we would say, hey, I really see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. I just want you to make more money. Liquidation rate is the only metric I care about really. And there was really less urgency and more willingness to have an opaque relationship with the agency. That's really changed. And now it's more about, hey, keep us out of the papers. I'm very concerned. I want more exposure to what it is you're doing because I face more exposure, and that means I'm going to scrutinize how you do things as well as what you do to a much greater extent. I'm going to demand a level of transparency that didn't exist before. So how do agencies respond? not really as badly as this picture. It's more the case that we're hearing a kind of a sigh and then a resigned, hey, we'll do whatever it takes to keep your business, even if that means working off your system. But don't forget we have value add, and our know-how can be valuable if you let us display it. Banks, on the other hand, are saying, I've got to prove that your contacts are within the bounds of compliance, that you're only trying to reach people where you, on their mobile, where you've captured express consent, and at work if you've done so within the boundaries of the regulations. There's a much greater concern with UDAP around there about offer fairness and consistency, and at the regulator's examiner level, they're pouring through the offers and trying to figure out if the bank's policies are really being implemented by the agency. Similarly, on delivering documentation and even disclosures, and the content of that document and disclosure behavior is being scrutinized. So the traditional how are your collectors handling customers is still going on, but all these other things are really being layered on top of it with the, not request, but demand that we have transparency to the creditor, vendor managers, and by extension through to the regulators. So I'm curious whether you and your own bank have changed either internal recovery operations or your agency oversight in preparation for an audit, or just in general responding to the new regulations. We're hearing the vast majority of people say, yeah, they've made or are making or are planning to make changes in their internal recovery operation. As I mentioned earlier, some people have shut theirs down while they figure out when and how to restart them. So I'm curious what your thinking would be on that. So what exactly is the problem? The traditional system is the bank, when they charge off the debt in their recovery system, a record will send it out to a file placement aggregator who will send it off to various agencies who load it in their own systems and work it. That means that when the file comes back through the aggregator, I've got a file reconcilement issue and a payment reconcilement issue. I also have very difficult time proving what happened with offers, documentation, and contact strategies. And so I default to being able to say, well, there are policies and procedures in place at this agency through which I trust that they are doing the things that they're supposed to do. Unfortunately, trust, even the Reagan trust but verify, isn't good enough for the regulators these days. They want proof. And so many banks are turning to, hey, I'm going to make you use my system of record, and that will help with the file and payment reconciliation because it's all on my system. I just have to reconcile across agencies or across portfolios if my system does that. Now I have new issues. I have to train the agencies. I've got to set them up on my system. I've got to, in some cases, wire those connections up. I've got to make sure that they fit now within my InfoSec guidelines. And then I'm able to control the strategies on contacts and dialers and so forth. But the agency is not able to have any control over it, which is back to the agency's I provide value add comment, which is very difficult to do. To the extent that my bank recovery system manages offers, manages documents and content, manages contact strategies, well then I can prove it. I still need to do a separate effort on agency policies and procedures, and quite frankly, many of the recovery systems are weak in providing proof of the compliant activities. So I'm curious, again, for you to think about the level of scrutiny that you guys at your bank put in place. Are you just sending and receiving files with no proactive view? Are you doing some sort of pre-approval of agency strategies but still just looking after the fact that whether they did it, or have you gone the whole Megillah and have the agencies working entirely off your system without giving them a lot of control? So let's turn to the good part. How does CMC help in this equation? I think I'm going to show you that we can position your bank for success both in terms of operational controls, whether you're talking about file placement, whether you're talking about after-the-fact monitoring, or whether you're talking about proactively managing the strategy and operation of the agency. And one of the points I think we'll demonstrate is that unlike the traditional put the agency on the bank system, we give you the ability to have the agency work off of the bank system, but also give them as much or as little control as you want them to have. We'll also talk about agency oversight. What are we doing with respect to helping you capture documentation, capture policies, and automate some of the manual intensive efforts of being in a place to be reportable and auditable. So if you think about what we could do, we have a capability at CMC we call Flex Select, which allows you through our decision tree manager to control the segmentation at an individual account level, just like the sort of file aggregators of old, and resegment on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis based on the treatments that have been made, based on compliant or non-compliant activities, and based on the degree of adherence, so that you could start to reorient your placements to different agencies to the extent that an agency isn't complying or adhering to your direction in a more proactive way than has been traditionally the case. Nothing succeeds like the vote of taking records away and placing them with an agency that's doing what you want them to do. The other thing you can do with this solution is actually enforce compliance in certain areas, not necessarily the whole of the agency operation, i.e., I could say, I'm going to pass these files over to you, but only if you verify certain offers through our platform, and meaning the bank's platform, and verify certain workflows have been done to our specification. If I want to go the next step, I'd say, well, let's go all the way through to proactively managing what the agency does. I'm going to control the programs and the channels and the queuing at the agency. I'm going to control specialty process workflows like bankruptcy and hardship INEs. I'm going to make sure they use my document management so that the content is consistently adhered to. I'm going to enforce that the customer's experience is seamless regardless of whether they're dealing with self-service or agents. I'm going to do all of that by making the Flex Collect system available to the agency as the system that they work. But I also have the option, and I'll show you this, of having the agency participate in the strategy setting, of having the agency use their own dialer, of having the agency still within this proactive management schema have some control that allows them to provide their value add. So if you're familiar with Flex Collect, we have within the platform a completely self-contained strategy engine, which is driven off of decision trees through which I segment the accounts. And I do that today for my collections pre-charge-off records. I can also do it for my post-charge-off records. And I can use every single attribute in my file to decide what I want to use as my segmentation mechanism, whether I want to have certain records queued, whether I want to have records in certain nodes receive specific programs, whether I want them to receive channel treatments, and I can manage all of that down to the individual account level using decision tree, including for an individual account what offers are available for that particular account to work when my agent is talking to the customer, as well as what additional elements of that offer am I going to make the case. I can do full payments in full, I can do partial payments, I can do settlements, I can do all sorts of different payment programs. At the same time, I can manage specific specialty processes that might, for example, require an e-signature, and I might have certain account attributes be the ones that drive who is eligible for a e-signature and who isn't. Or when a person starts in a dialogue either with an agent or online, I can say only certain people will be offered this e-sign workflow that is appropriate only to the data element-driven identification of that particular person. I can also do other specialty workflows, let's say a complaint management and tracking solution, where I can set them up on our platform, have certain people receive channel contacts at certain steps in the process so those channel contacts are automated, so that I know every one of my agencies is following my process because I enforce having the channels happen. I can make variable assignments based on where someone is within a process that allows me to make sure that my data is consistently being managed across all of my agencies. And I can script exactly what I want to gather. I'm not really scripting the agent conversation, but I sort of am, because by creating this survey flow, I can give my agencies a consistent set of things I want them to do and say and ask, and how I want them to answer questions. On the document side, I can create templates for my letters, for my text messages, for my emails, for my IVR scripts even, and I can manage those across multiple languages if I would like to do, so that I know that when a particular account gets to a particular state, the letter that's going out from the agency has all of the content I want. And this can be set up so that the agency's logo is what goes out over this document, and that can be set up so that all agencies are using the same consistent documentation, and they have complete logging of all of the versions of all of the documents that have been sent out. Similarly, I can give my agencies the omni-channel control so that when I set up something like an INE survey that a particular customer needs to go through in order to get their offer, I can make sure that that same methodology is followed whether they go to the web portal or whether they go to the agent without any separate strategy. I set the strategy up once, and it's configured by the system to be executed the same regardless of which channel the customer interacts with. So I can give my agencies all of the power of FlexCollect and give them the ability to control some of those decision trees and workflows, or not, if I want to drive it all centrally. Do either or in some combination. Some agencies I might say, you're new to us, we're going to force you to use our particular strategies, but other agencies with whom I have a long-standing and trusted relationship, I might say, look, here are my guideline boundaries. You can work within them to set up your own decision trees and workflows to operate the way that you know best. Now let's say I don't want to proactively control the agency. I could use all of what I just showed you in reactive mode. So I can take and build the ability to look at all the activities that happen at the agency, because I have the ability to look at their FlexCollect, because I can write rules to create queues that would put certain particular elements in a queue. Like here's one that says, I want to see a queue of all people who were attempted more than 20 times in my dialer. And by taking the data from the agency after they work on their own system, pass it back through FlexCollect, you have the ability to build queues and figure out things like if I've got exceptions in call frequency or emails or some sort of complaint remediation, or you let your imagination run wild, you can set up queues in FlexCollect that will then give you a whole list of customer accounts that you'll want to talk to that agency about. And similarly, I can have particular workflows that require sign-offs, whereas others are left to the discretion of the agency. So we talked about operational controls. I want to turn for a moment to the subject of agency oversight. The way our solution works is that we will provide with our Credagility platform the ability for the bank to set up a set of workflows into which your third-party agencies will put their data and their answers in a specific client-dedicated database that then allows you to have an auditable, reportable record of what happened. So you're going to set up your own procedures you want them to follow. The vendor is then going to complete those procedures online and update all the documents. Your vendor management people are going to review that and score it, and then you'll have a report with a remediation flow and the ability to monitor how the vendor is complying with your requirements. So the way it works is you set up an overall compliance management workflow, which might have a number of different sections, for example, by state for all the documentation you want. The agencies themselves would use a web-based portal to access the workflows and upload documents. They would then have to take all the different documents that you're requiring of them in that process. They upload those documents to the system, and then they answer certain questions about each document, so you have both the image of the document itself and metadata about the document that the agency is answering, so that you can then strategize on that metadata. You would then go into the workflow, you being the bank vendor management team, and look at how satisfied you are with the vendor's answers and whether their answers comport with the image of the document and the image quality of the document and so forth. And you would score on each of the individual steps how they did, and then that would both lead to the ability to take the audit that you did at vendor management and create a remediation workflow that the agency can respond to, as well as you can score how your various agencies are dealing with all of the different requirements that you put upon them, and you can have a nice simple dashboard to identify the outliers that really do need vendor management attention. Obviously, the more of this we can automate in terms of notifications and alerts when a particular document is about to expire, for example, the less staff I need to dedicate to running through manual worksheets and pieces of paper to keep up with all that. So how does all that work? Yes, you have made contract changes and have to do in order to get this greater insight and transparency over the agencies. But really what we're delivering here is the ability to report on and to prove that you are in control of all the strategies and any changes made to them, even if you give the agency some control within bank established guidelines. But in any case, you see fully and complete transparently what has gone on with the agency in terms of the strategies and their execution. On the vendor management side, as I just described, the vendor audits can be managed both remotely and they can be automated so that you have both a record of the original procedure workflow that you put them through, your audit of that workflow, and the remediation steps, all of which I can turn over to the regulators and say, see, this is how I know I'm in control of making sure my agencies are doing this the right way. So, at the end of the day, so what? In this solution, the regulators as well as the bank can be confident that the strategies that are proper and compliant are in place, and that you have confirmed that agencies operationally are conforming to those strategies, because if you have them working off FlexCollect, they have no other alternative. If you have them monitored by FlexCollect, you will get exception reports whenever they have not done it. And if you're placing the files, you can still run them through from a monitoring standpoint so that any anomalies get captured. You can have a record of the remediation, and you've got comprehensive, and I call it waterproof, reportability of everything that was done. Now, the equally important so what is that agencies are still free to deliver what's unique in their value added. They can still have incentives between you that recognize your performance. They can still do an extract of the file off of FlexCollect and run it off their dialer as long as the results of all their dials get fed back into FlexCollect. You can have some programs that don't require manual override and some that do at your discretion and based on how much you trust that agency relationship. And if you use FlexCollect entirely, you get rid of the whole file transfer and reconcilement process and replace it instead with a segmentation model that determines which queues go to agency A, which queues go to agency B, and which queues go to agency C, and so forth. And so you can have a fully auditable, compliant support for multiple different paths. And that can be multiple paths within an agency, where some records they work at their discretion and some require an override where they have to either look at the payment program on FlexCollect or they have to go to FlexCollect and do certain workflows. And broader than per agency, you can do it across your whole agency population. So why is this important? Obviously, automation lowers expense, but systemic business rules provide the consistency even when customer experiences appropriately vary. And you can apply this just as equally to your agencies now as you do to your internal operations. The advantage that CMC brings is with our managed service, it's relatively easy to deploy and change. And it's easy to show, therefore, that you have controls in place to your auditors from the CFPB and OCC. The fact that we're delivering through the cloud means that we're faster and also cheaper and easier to deploy, cheaper from a total cost of ownership standpoint, and insanely flexible so that you can change it to deal with all of the occurrences that our lovely regulators like to throw at us. So thank you for your time. We're running out of time. Any suggestions, please email them to us, as I said. And remember that you're going to see a post-webinar survey. Got just a couple of questions that, in thinking about this, it was suggested, won't allowing the agencies to access this system require a ton of connectivity and InfoSec pain? And I think, as I've said, that isn't the case. with current bank systems that weren't built to accommodate external folks working on them, that might have been the case. But here you're talking about white labeling an IP address at an agency so that no data actually leaves your confines. So InfoSec would love this solution relative to the old ship the data over to the agency and hope to heck you get it all back. Another question, what does this do to agency performance? Well, having to learn your system is a function of how easy your system is to use. And FlexCollect and the credibility platform for vendor oversight have been proven to be very, very easy to train, easy to come up to speed because they're visual, web-based platforms. And then you really get down to what's the performance impact of using the strategies, either yours or allowing them to customize the strategies that they run themselves. So we are hearing that at least with the FlexCollect sort of approach, agencies don't have to suffer a big degradation in their performance. Anyway, it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank you for your 30 minutes, and I look forward to speaking with you again next month. Thanks for joining us on CMC Solves.